Welcome back to our chapter on human development. Earlier we looked at some physical developments like motor skills and sensation. Now we're going to look at cognitive and social development. Cognitive means thinking, right? Cognition is our thoughts, our intelligence, our ability to create and produce language. And as a child develops, they get better at those processes. There was a developmental psychologist named Jean Piaget who became very influential on things like how we teach children, who studied children and basically mapped out what he believed were 4 stages of cognitive development. He believed basically that all children are naturally curious. He believed it's a biological response to our environment, that we are born a curious species because that is the best, most efficient way to learn. If we're intrigued about this world, we'll explore it, and as we explore it, we will build schemas. Schemas are categories, concept boxes. So, for example, a child must learn what is food, what is soft, what is fun, what is scary, what is hot, what is cold, right? So every new experience we begin to file away. Assimilation, according to Piaget, was the process of learning something new and incorporating that into already existing categories. So if a child picks up a toy he's never played with before, but it plays just like an old toy he does know how to play with, well, he just puts that experience in the same box and says, well, these are used the same way. Accommodation, according to Piaget, is when we learn something new, but instead of putting it into a pre-existing schema, we have to build a new one. For example, when most of us were little kids, and I'll use American currency for this example, if you were to ask me would I rather have 10 pennies or 1 quarter, I would have answered 10 pennies. Because my limited experience, my schema was the more you have of something, the more you have in terms of worth or value. Eventually I had to relearn that no, that's not the way, in this case, how money works. It's about value and it's not about numbers in your hands. So I had to accommodate that new information. Let's look briefly at Piaget's 4 stages of development. From the first 2 years of life, he called this your sensory motor stage, and it's pretty easy to remember if you just look at that word. He argued that a child's main goal was to use their senses, and once they develop motor skills, use those to purposefully explore their world. A 2-year-old and a 1-year-old, they're not thinking about the deep questions. They're not problem solving in the grand traditions that we think of. Instead, they're merely exploring their world, soaking up all the data they can, and creating those schemas. Now, in all these stages, Piaget noted several milestones. For example, eventually a child will learn object permanence, the concept that things exist even though you can't see them. If you've had early experiences with a child, with an infant, you know that they can be very upset when someone leaves their line of sight. However, as we get older, we can begin to realize that just because we can't see something, things do exist. And once that happens, it starts to change the way we think, which is cognitive development. We can now think about things that aren't right in front of our faces, or we can start thinking about things that have or have not happened yet. Here's a little example of object permanence I thought was pretty funny. I'll share with you now.
Hey, Stewie, peekaboo.
Yes, I see you, fat man.
Where's Daddy?
What? Where did you go? Oh, this is impossible. But I can hear you, but I can't see. He must really be gone.
Peekaboo.
Ah! How the hell did you do that? Look, I thought you disappeared, otherwise I wouldn't have picked my... Oh, great, leave when I'm right in the middle of a sentence.
The second stage, according to Piaget, is the pre-operational stage, from age 2 to about 6 or 7 years, what you might think of as the preschool years. Now that we've developed object permanence, we're starting to be able to handle thoughts of things that aren't right in front of us, and this leads to symbolic thinking. If you think about language, language is about symbols. The letters, the noises, they are just symbols that represent what we're trying to communicate. And so now that we can handle symbols, we can start to talk about and feel about things that aren't there right in front of us. We can start communicating better. Now at this stage, children still possess some difficulties, such as egocentric thinking. If you've heard about egocentrism, the idea that basically the world revolves around you. In this period of a child's life, that makes sense because everything that's ever happened to them happened to them. That's their only point of view. And so, of course, you're going to have more egocentric thought and behavior. They also can't perform operations. An operation is a reversible mental task, basically problem solving inside your head instead of outside. A great example is the conservation task, which you see a picture of it here. We show a child two glasses, A and B, and we say, how much water, or excuse me, we say, which one has more? Most children will say they have the same. So then we will take one of those glasses, and we'll, in front of them, pour it into this tall glass, and then ask, which one has more? For many children in the pre-operational stage, they will say, C has more. Even though obviously it's the same amount, we just changed containers. They can't think through that form of logical reasoning. Instead, they're a lot more literal. The third stage, concrete operational stage, is where we start being able to replace those literal interpretations with logical reasoning. Not surprising that it's around age 6 to 7 we start formal education because we can handle these processes. And finally, there's formal operational stage, the teenage years. According to Piaget, the big milestone here is our ability to think abstractly, those large concepts. If you ask a preschooler, what is love? They will probably tell you something literal, like love is when you give someone a present, or love is when you hug someone. But we know the concept of love is large and complex, and good things and bad things, and everything in between. And so it's in adolescence that we start tackling those more abstract thoughts. And there was another developmental psychologist named Vygotsky who wasn't interested in Piaget's cognitive development in terms of biology. Remember, Piaget saw this as a natural biological process, something we're born into and will move along these stages. Vygotsky believed our cognition was through social support, what he called scaffolding. According to him, scaffolding is when a child is not able to complete a task on their own, but with your assistance, they're able to understand and then ultimately succeed at the task. He called this their zone of proximal development or distance. Again, I don't want you to think I mean do something for the child, but I'm saying with your assistance, you're able to develop that child to the next stage of cognitive reasoning, at least according to Vygotsky. Now, we did a little bit of cognitive development, but let's move on and do a bit of social development as well. As far as babies go, we don't typically talk about them having personalities, at least not in the psychological world. We save that for a little bit older, and instead we use the word temperament, which is a very general pattern of response. The most commonly labeled ones are easy child, difficult child, or slow to warm up child. That easy child is the one who has typical, predictable patterns. They respond well to new stimuli. They typically have a positive emotional state. Difficult child would be the opposite of that. Or the slow to warm up child may seem difficult, but it just takes them longer to adjust to new stimuli. Other modern dimensions of temperament have changed to not just be easy or difficult, but we'll monitor things like how well can this child regulate their own actions? How good is their inhibition, or are they inhibited at all? And we need to look at their affect, their general emotional demeanor towards us. One of the reasons we study temperament is not necessarily to predict how that infant's going to grow up. In fact, marking your child as easy or difficult typically is not a good predictor of how they will be just 6 months later. But what it does help us predict is how a parent will treat that child. We do find that children who are difficult or slow to warm up have more difficulties with their parents. For example, a difficult child is more likely to be physically abused. A slow to warm up child is less likely to be interacted with than an easygoing child. Now, this word attachment, which was postulated by several psychologists, was a reminder that humans do not imprint. You may have seen geese or ducks. As soon as they're born, the first adult animal around, they will bond to immediately. That's part of their instinct. Humans don't do that. We build attachments over time. And that's good for us because if we did it the other way, adoptions would be impossible, or doctors would have to make sure they never looked at your baby first. So we can grow these relationships at a much slower pace. John Bowlby was one of those psychologists I mentioned. He talked about attachment, and he argued that this was a biological functioning. So again, on the nature-nurture spectrum, he believed it was nature. This is something that will help keep us, or at least help us strive to attach to the caregiver and vice versa. So we're there to start building attachment from day one, both in how we look and how we act. Mary Ainsworth, who also studied attachment, was interested in studying what makes a secure attachment, meaning that the infant is bonded and wants to be with that caregiver. One of the ways she determined attachment was through the strange situation test. It's fairly simple. It's exactly what it sounds like. You have a child that's with their family member, and you introduce a new element, such as a stranger that walks into the room, and you see how the child reacts. So the child spends his or her energy trying to get back to mom, or cuddling mom, or at least acting in a way. If you use mom for protection, it's a possible sign, in fact it's a good sign, that the child is securely attached. Harry Harlow was interested in the physical side of attachment, the idea that not only babies but other mammals need to be physically touched, to be physically held to form attachments. If you followed his research, Harry Harlow had two surrogate mothers, two fake mothers for these baby rhesus monkeys who never knew their own mothers. One of the fake mothers was just a wire cylinder with a bottle hanging out, and that was the mom that always fed the babies. The other mom, as you see in the picture, never had a bottle, but it was always covered in a warm, soft cloth. He found that whenever the baby was excited, whenever the baby was scared, whenever the baby was seeking comfort, it wouldn't go to the mom who fed it. It would always go to the mom that was warm and soft to the touch. A reminder that socially, touch is an important part of our development. So what causes a baby to be securely attached to mom and dad or whoever's caring for them? What's about meeting their needs, responding to them when they're distressed, such as crying, constantly physically stimulating, holding them, playing with them, touching them, and also, and probably as much important, cognitively stimulating them, giving them information, action, things to interest them, so that we can grow that brain, develop their experiences. We're going to stop there. When we come back, we're going to talk a bit about parenting styles, and we'll look at some more changes in this child as we get a bit older. See you then.